Good morning, students. I'm unable to come for the lesson today, but there's something I want to capture that is very important that I want you to actually take note of. And in regards to what we were discussing yesterday, I just want to put more emphasis and be able to actually help you understand what we were looking at. So what I want you to actually get introduced to this morning is that I want us first to look at this topic called response, reception, and coordination. And in relation to this topic, I'm going to look at the following areas in the next 1 hour. Then I can be able to share the video. So be free to actually be able to look at it and be able to give any comments where necessary. So in relation to this topic, I'm going to look at the following areas in brief. Number one, I'm going to look at the cerebral spinal fluid that is found in the brain and in the spinal cord. Number two, I'll look at the central nervous system. I'll as well look at the peripheral nervous system. I'll be able to tailor down and be able to look at the cranial nerves under the peripheral nervous system and the spinal nerves under the peripheral nervous system. I'll be able to look at the spinal cord and the major parts of the brain that actually form the central nervous system. So to begin, I'll actually be able to first say that response, reception, and coordination in animals can be well discussed under the following. Number one, in as far as vertebrates are concerned, those animals that have a backbone, you'll realize that they have both the nervous system and as well they have what we call the endocrine or the hormonal system. So to begin with the nervous system, I'll want actually to say that the nervous system has majorly the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. If you look at the central nervous system, we have the brain and the spinal cord. When you look at the brain, it's a very, very important part of the body. It actually ensures that each and every metabolic activity in the body of a living organism is well taken care of. So it controls each and every aspect in as far as the life of an individual is concerned. So if you look at this case, you'll realize that the brain has actually been able to get divided into three main parts. We have what you call the forebrain, we have what you call the midbrain, and we have what you call the hindbrain. If you look at the forebrain, it has the following parts. We have the cerebellum, we have the hypothalamus, we have the thalamus, and we have what you call the pituitary gland. If you look at the midbrain, it is also called mesencephalon. This part of the brain is very, very important. It relays any nervous communication from the remaining parts of the body to the forebrain. If you look at the hindbrain, it is majorly made up of two main parts. We have what you call the medulla oblongata and we have what you call the cerebellum. To begin with the forebrain, I'll first say the cerebellum is a very important part of the brain. It has two hemispheres. We have what you call the right and the left. In most cases, if you look at the cerebellum, you'll realize that it has the following functions. Number one, the cerebellum is actually very, very, very important in ensuring that learning, memory, and personality are well taken care of. Learning in the sense that it is responsible for the reasoning. When you talk about memory, the information stored in the brain is able to get retrieved easily by any student when the cerebellum is actually well in good condition. If you look at the cerebellum again, you'll realize that the cerebellum is actually very, very important in ensuring that any nervous communication in relation to vision, hearing, and taste is well interpreted so that a response is actually able to get communicated very easily. look at a case whereby I'm trying to actually use my eyes to look at some things around me, I'll realize that if I look at somebody and realize that this is a person, the information first gets recorded on the retina. That information is able to get carried to the cerebrum through what you call the optic nerve for the interpretation, so that I can be able to understand that whatever I'm looking at is actually a human being. If you look at hearing, any sound received by the ear pinna, and that sound moves through the external auditory meatus, then to the tympanic membrane or eardrum, then to the ear ossicles, then through the oval window or fenestra ovalis, then to the cochlea that has two different types of fluids. We have what you call the perilymph and the endolymph. That information, which is actually in form of sound waves, has been converted to vibrations. These vibrations are able to get carried as a nervous impulse to the brain, mainly the cerebrum, for interpretation, so that I can be able to understand that this is actually a sound of something. If I put anything on my tongue, I can be able to confirm the sweetness or the bitterness of whatever I'm actually trying to put on my tongue by actually having that information getting taken to the cerebrum for interpretation. If I look at the cerebrum again, the cerebrum is responsible for coordinating any muscular contraction and relaxation in relation to what we call voluntary activities. Like any voluntary activity related to the lips, to the neck, and to the forelimbs, or even the hind limbs, is well taken care of by the cerebrum. If you look at the hypothalamus, hypothalamus is responsible for maintaining a constant internal environment in the body of a living organism. For example, issues relating to osmoregulation and thermoregulation are well taken care of by the aid of what you call the hypothalamus part of the brain. The hypothalamus also houses receptors responsible for anything related to sleep and appetite. Are you having any sleeping disorders which get referred to as insomnia? That means then you are supposed to actually blame the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is actually able to house receptors responsible for controlling any activities relating to what we call sleep and appetite. You don't feel like eating, there must be a problem. You have to blame the hypothalamus. If I go to the thalamus, this is a very important part of the brain. It actually forms the main part of the brain called the forebrain, which is actually forming 3/4 of the whole brain as far as our heads are concerned. If you look at the thalamus houses receptors responsible for pain and pleasure. Someone pinches you, you get your finger pricked, that means the thalamus actually can be able to tell you that that is actually pain. In relation to pleasure, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a boyfriend? Are you feeling some pleasure? Are you happy about something? You have to actually thank the thalamus. If I go to the midbrain, also called mesencephalon, you'll realize that this part of the brain relays any nervous communication in as far as the trunk and any other part of the brain to the forebrain. That actually means that when you look at the midbrain or mesencephalon, it ensures that any communication from any parts below the head can be able to reach the forebrain in an easier and faster way for what you call coordination and response to be able to take place. Going back to the hindbrain, which is made up of the medulla oblongata and what we call cerebellum. When you look at the cerebellum, it is responsible for body balance and posture through what we call muscular contraction. So it actually ensures that the muscles of any part of the body are able to contract and relax to ensure that body balance and posture is maintained. If you look at the medulla oblongata, that people get confused trying to say that it is the main part of the body or the main part of the brain that actually is responsible for reasoning. No, the medulla oblongata is responsible for, number one, it actually facilitates the constriction or the dilation of the blood vessels, such that blood pressure is actually placed under control. So it is responsible for either the constriction of the blood vessels or the dilation of the blood vessels such that the blood pressure is taken care of. It also controls involuntary body activities such as swallowing, salivating, and many other involuntary activities such as breathing also. So what am I trying to say here? Any involuntary activity like swallowing, like salivating, like breathing, like any form of heartbeat that one may have are able to get controlled or are under the control of medulla oblongata. Now, looking at the spinal cord, you'll realize that the spinal cord has, number one, the dorsal horn. Number two, it has the ventral horn. Before I can be able to talk about the dorsal horn and the ventral horn, you'll realize that from the outer part of what we have as the spinal cord, we have what you call the vertebral column. The vertebral column. From the base of the brain to the lower part of the body, you'll realize that there are actually a total of 33 bones forming what you call the vertebral column or the backbone. So that means surrounding the spinal cord from outside is actually the vertebral column, made up of 33 bones, which are actually able to get distributed in the following regions: the cervical region, the thoracic region, the lumbar region, and the sacral region. And as we end at the end of that part, we shall have what we call the coccyx or coccygeal. So going inwards, you'll have what we call the meninges. We have the dura, the pia, and the arachnoid. Those three parts, pia, P-I-A, dura, D-U-R-A, arachnoid, R-A-C-H-N-O-I-D, are actually the three membranes that again enclose the spinal cord. Then from there, the spinal cord is made up of two major parts. We have what we call the gray matter, which is H-shaped, and the white matter. On the left part of the spinal cord, we shall have the spinal nerve actually entering the spinal cord, and again the spinal nerve leaving the spinal cord. The spinal nerve enters the spinal cord through what we call the dorsal root at the upper part of the spinal cord. The spinal nerve leaves the spinal cord through what we call the ventral root at the lower part of the spinal cord on a diagram. Now, on my right, in as far as this spinal cord is concerned, you'll realize that we have what you call the sensory neuron coming from the receptor organ now to the spinal cord, which forms part of what you call the central nervous system. So the sensory neuron from the receptor organ can be able to enter the spinal cord through the dorsal root. Then, what is actually inside the spinal cord that actually mediates or connects or links the sensory neuron and the motor? We have what you call the relay neuron. So we have what you call the sensory neuron, the relay neuron, and we have what you call the motor neuron. Sensory neuron is connected or is linked to the relay neuron through what you call a synapse or a neurojunction. The relay neuron again gets connected to the motor neuron through what you call a synapse or a neural junction. Now, so we have the sensory neuron through the dorsal aorta, we have the relay neuron, then we have what you call the motor neuron through what you call the